Hare Krishna and welcome back to the Atma Paradigm. We're now on session 8 of this part 3 on life, and today's title is What's a Body For? The Shapes of Living Things. So we've been exploring the question of how the biology of our bodies works, and indeed how the biology of all living bodies work. And what I'd like to take you through now, just a little recap from last week. We need to remind ourselves why we are pursuing a particular approach focused on the role of consciousness. And it stems from the fact that the Atma Paradigm is a thesis that says consciousness is a fundamental aspect of reality. And we're asking the question, what if we took that really seriously and incorporated that idea of the fundamental nature of consciousness into our sciences? What would we uncover? What new discoveries could we make? And well, it's difficult to forecast what we might discover, because that's in the realm of sci-fi. But what we can say is that taking the role of non-neural consciousness seriously, it can help us address many of the existing problems and gaps in our current explanations. And it could revolutionize our understanding of the world and our existence within it. And that's why we're exploring the nature of consciousness and what it means for life. Now, one area that we are trying to shed some light on is, of course, this aspect of biology. And last week we considered the role of DNA and molecular activity within the cell. We looked also at the behavior of the cells as they differentiate and arrange themselves into various types of tissues, and then take the forms of the different organs and link themselves, these organs, into interdependent systems in order to produce the whole body of an organism. And our conclusions were that your DNA and your genes are important, of course they are, and they're important for all sorts of activities and functions within the cell, but they do not tell the cells what the cells should do. Rather, the cell uses the information available in DNA for its own purposes. So your biology is not a bottom-up process from genes building the organism. It is a top-down process from the purposes of the organism cascading down to way in the different levels, including the cells and how they use the information within the genes. Now, we also established that no one has identified the source of the morphological template, that information that defines the overall shape of the body. It's not in the DNA. It's not in the individual cells, nor in all the intricate ways that those cells act amongst one another. So what does define the general form of a human body, or of any body? So to help us, we presented what we call our psychophysical model. It's a simplification of some of our earlier models showing the fields of reality. And in this simplified concept, we have 3 basic fields, each manifesting their own fundamental properties. We've got consciousness with its individual unit, the Atma. We've got the cognitive functions, which for now we've been classifying with the general term mind. And we have physical stuff, the stuff that our body's made of and all the objects of this world are made of. Now, as we discussed, how the mind receives inputs. It receives inputs from our senses, sending all sorts of data that it has gathered about the things we see, we hear, we smell, and so on. The things that our senses pick up, sends it off to the mind. And these form the expression. They form a kind of picture or a form within the mind. But we're also getting another input from the expression of the Atma coming in the form of volition. So together, these inputs, develop the content of our mind. And the mind flexes and forms in response to this content. So your mind has one form when you think of, say, a tree with its huge trunk, its big branches and lush greenery. And it has a different form when you think of something like, say, the sights and sounds of a river. It's blue-grey colour, it's shimmering, it's babbling and gurgling as it flows. So the same is true when we fill our minds with thoughts and desires, with imagination of objects and events that we see or imagine to be real. Now, we presented evidence that such mental forms can manifest into reality within our own body as disorders or markings. Now, they have to be serious, significant, perhaps even traumatic, but impressions held within the mind did seem to have an effect on the manifestation of aspects of our biological body. And in some cases, we saw that they can even be carried over from something that occurred in a previous life. Now, what we're seeing in those examples last week were not direct evidence of the subtle body template that we talked about, but they did establish a sort of proof of principle that the things we place within our mind can affect the biology of our body in this life, and perhaps maybe into our next incarnation. Now, I did promise to return to the topic of reincarnation, and I will, but not this week. Now, these examples of what the mind is able to do lead us to propose that there must be some kind of factor specifying the overall form of our physical body. And we've suggested something like a subtle form that acts as a template for the development of the physical body. Now, we term this concept of the subtle form of the body, using a Sanskrit term, the Sukshma Sharira. Now, it isn't quite right just to equate the subtle body with mind on its own. Yes, the subtle body is primarily mental stuff, but the Sankhya concept of Sukshma Sharira also includes other non-physical aspects, non-neural aspects that contribute to connecting the content of our minds with the functioning of our biological bodies. And I'll talk about those a little later today. So within that subtle body, there is the template, a set of information which specifies and generates the actual physical form of the body. And it is the aspect that carries out that function of specifying, which kind of gives us our template, that we call the Sharira Linga. It's a subtle template of the biological body. And this concept addresses some of the problems that we looked at in the last couple of weeks, because it provides a source of local information, i.e. within the organism, that has agency, i.e. the ability to specify form within matter, and is also available to the organism from the start of its development within the womb, or in some cases within the egg. Now, today I want to take this kind of idea to the next level, to explore how and why it works as the template, not just for our human bodies, but also for other species. And I'd like to start and approach this issue by thinking about what it means to be an organism. What is an organism? What's it for? What's it trying to achieve? Why might it exist in the first place? Now, even if someone thinks that there's no reason or purpose behind anything, still, it seems that once an organism actually exists, it has a very good idea of what it wants to achieve and what it wants to do. So what we can say is that the overarching fundamental purpose of an organism is that it tries to accommodate consciousness. That is the purpose of an organism. It is something which tries to, or which does, accommodate consciousness. Now, we concluded in earlier talks that life entails the presence of consciousness in humans, in animals, and we think in plants as well. And it would therefore be rather negligent of us to define life without this due regard for the presence of consciousness. That is the thing which makes it live rather than dead. And we should look at consciousness not just as a passenger or just some kind of weird little property that is thrown up by the biology of the body, because that's not how we see ourselves. We don't see ourselves just as a passenger. We like to think we are the end user of the physical body. You and me, as conscious entities, as Atmas, are the specific end users who believes this body belongs to me. And the essential nature of the Atma, which is to exist, to know, and to enjoy. And it is this nature of the Atma, these essential drivers, which feed through into what we expect of our time in this body. We exist, we want to continue to exist. We want to gather information. Why? Because that will help us in our enjoyment and our experience of this world. So to exist, to know, and to enjoy manifests the two things that consciousness tries to do in a biological body. And that is that we want to experience things, events and activities. And we express our will. We want to enhance those experiences. So we want to experience and we want to enhance those experiences. And that's the sum and substance of it for me, you, and for all other little critters. We want to experience life as best and as long as we can. And we do everything we can to perpetuate these experiences and to make them as pleasurable as is possible. And it is this expectancy that is derived from consciousness that defines what it wants a body to deliver. So let's get specific. What's a body for? How do organisms use them? Now, for this analysis, we're going to keep to the kingdom of Animalia. That's the animal kingdom. There's other kingdoms of life forms, plants, fungi, protozoa, and so on. But we're keeping to the animal kingdom, and we're going to consider one of its phyla, the phylum of Chordata, which these include all your favorites, basically. Mammals, birds, fish, reptiles, and amphibians. So I've chosen this group because I think they've got the most finely articulated forms, and I don't mean that to be dismissive of a protozoa. But they've also got many of the features that we humans also possess. So there's going to be an interesting way of creating some comparisons. So what do the various types of creatures within this grouping do? Well, they eat, they sleep, they mate, and they defend themselves. And what do they need to carry out these activities? Well, here they are lined up: eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. So let's do a very quick tour, considering the needs of each of these activities. Start with eating. And that is that creatures need to locate food, then gather it up, and maybe you have to catch it. So these activities require motion plus some sensory inputs. You have to see things, you have to maybe hear, you have to smell. So you need these different senses in order just to gather food. And when you've got it, you need a mouth to eat, to chew, to drink, and maybe your mouth acted as the device by which you caught and maybe killed your prey. And then you'll need a digestive and evacuation system. Otherwise you'll explode. And then we sleep. And for sleep, for a good, safe, comfortable rest, we need a nest, den, or cave, or some kind of luxury penthouse, whatever we need. Now, some animals make do with whatever they can find naturally, just lie down and snooze. Others go to great lengths to make it nice, to make it safe and secure for themselves. And another thing that animals do is reproduce. Some do this with minimal parental responsibility. Others take it very seriously. And this raises the stakes on what that organism needs. For instance, nesting isn't then just a place to sleep, but may be crucial for raising a family. So you need a bigger and a better nest and have to work harder bringing in lots more food. And courtship can be expensive and time consuming. And I got to throw this one in here, it's a little digression. But you see this intricate design and construction here? It's on a seabed, and it's created by the male Japanese white-spotted pufferfish. And it does it just to impress the female as a suitable mating nest. Incredible, intricate design. And they're all very similar, the ones that the pufferfish do. Where did they get these ideas from? Anyway, all of this difficulty for eating, for nesting, for mating, leads to defending. So not only does every creature have to have some form of gaining food, but you also have to have some way of defending yourself and stop being eaten by others. It's estimated that something like 95% of all life that has ever lived on Earth met its end in the mouth of another creature. That's a sobering thought. So, and if they aren't trying to eat you, they're probably after your kids. So defending also involves protecting your food supply, your territory, your luxury home, your mate. And for all these activities of eating, for reproduction and defending, being able to communicate is also really important. Finding food, maybe cooperation as a pack of creatures, for making attractive mating sounds and songs, to warn of predators to your friends, or to chat amongst the herd. So what all of this leads to is that a body, in order to do its job in terms of eating, sleeping, mating and defending, it needs quite a few faculties. And these faculties can be described as two sets of physical features. Features that do useful things, i.e. senses. And the senses are in two sets. There are senses that deal with perception, and senses or organs that involve action. Now, we've talked about them before in terms of the two directions that information passes between the consciousness of the Atma on one side and the physical body on another. So from one direction, the senses of perception are gathering information about the world and passing it along to the awareness of consciousness. And from the other direction, the Atma is expressing its will, which generates volition and desires within the mind, which then manifest through the activities which are expressed by the senses of action. Now, let's have a little look at these two sets of senses, which are common, as I say, to all the animals in our category. The first one are the senses of perception, 5 basic ones. The ability to see, to hear, to touch, to taste, and to smell. Now, the point I'm considering here is one of both commonality and also of distinctiveness. It's a kind of one and different situation. There we will see that there is commonality of all these senses within the different life forms we'll consider, but also each has their own distinctiveness. So my point is that all animals in this category possess the same set of senses, but each creature is distinctive in terms of what those various senses can do, or how they manifest, or how they're constructed, or even how they operate. Now, I'd love to do this in great detail, but I'm really only just going to give you a flavour of them today. We start with hearing. Now, apparently the creatures with great hearing include moths, bats, we know they can hear ultrasound, owls, apparently very good, elephants, dogs, cats. Cats have a special kind of feature. The human ear's got 3 muscles that can control its movement. A cat has 36 muscles to provide kind of picking up sound from all direction. So these animals enjoy widely diverse ranges of frequencies and also of volume. And then there's seeing. Again, owls up there score well for sight, especially at night. Top for seeing is the mantis shrimp. Who knew? It has the most complex eyes of any of the creatures in the animal kingdom. We've got 3 cones in our retina. The shrimp has 16 types of cones for gauging differences in color variation. Now, what does that mean for them? Their eyes have independent motion. That means that they must have some very clever software in order linking up what they're experiencing from that. And we've also shown an eye here. I wonder if you recognize which creature that is, with its horizontal shaped pupil. These are from sheep and goats have these. And it actually is a useful thing for herbivores because it means while they're eating, they've got panoramic view. So in this way, different kind of features for the different creatures. Touch, very different for, say, a spider, which is kind of hypersensitive because it can detect even the slightest motion or vibration of its prey. And then I could include the star-shaped, the star-nosed mole rather, with this funny nose, which it actually uses for feeling more than it does for smelling. And taste. The creature with the most taste buds is the catfish. You kind of think that's wasted on them, isn't it? 100,000 taste buds, not just in the mouth, but all over its body. It actually, because it's swimming around in mud, it's sensing the flavors of things it can eat in the area around it. That's amazing, isn't it? Be able to do swimming in taste. Cows also have 2 or 3 times as many taste buds as we do. So they really appreciate the distinctive flavors available in the meadow. And smell. One of the strongest smelling creature with the most developed smell is something like an albatross or an African bush elephant. Amazing smell at a distance. And of course we know tracker dogs can follow just one highly specific smell. It can be given that smell, it can find it and recognize that amongst so many others. So then we're on to the action senses. Now there's also 5 of them: moving, manipulating or handling, communicating, reproducing and evacuation. Let's see them. The action senses. First of all, motion. Well, cheetah, fastest on land, up to 70 miles an hour, 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. So built for speed, narrow head, large nostrils, and it's the only cat without fully retractable claws. So the speed even it's manifest in these other features in it. The sailfish is the fastest of all in the water, up to, again, 68 miles per hour. And it's got a very special hydrodynamic head. In the sky, peregrine falcon can reach up to 200 miles an hour in a dive. However, it's said that the white-throated needletail can reach 105 miles per hour in normal flight. So maybe you kind of think it actually is a better at using its wings. Now, all of these creatures are specializations of our template. They develop different structures for running, for swimming or flying that suits their body, and thereby offer the Atma dramatically different and diverse experiences. Now, generally, to excel at one ability requires specialization, and so when it comes to the action senses, no one animal body is really set up to excel at everything. But just as a bit of trivia, imagine there was a triathlon, land, air and water, no cycling, just what you could do on land, what you can do in air, what you can do in water. Which creature would win the triathlon? That's something to mull on. But I'm going to offer my suggestion. It's a duck. Specifically the elder duck, because it can waddle on land, it can swim on and in water, and of course it does well at flight. Anyway, the point is that each species has not only a particular senses of perception by which it interacts with the world, but has also got a particular set of action senses. And generally these involve a compromise. So accepting the loss or diminishing of one ability to gain another. And this is true with manipulation, because land animals face this compromise to varying extent. They lose motion to gain manipulation, i.e. they have sacrificed the benefit of their 4 limbs all being used for coordinated 4-legged running, and they've sacrificed that for the gain of using 4 limbs for maybe some other purpose, such as handling or manipulating things. And here's a squirrel, a bit of both. It can run, so more of a series of hops, and it can clamber up trees with using its front limbs, but it also, its front paws have a certain ability to handle delicate things like acorns, so they can bring to its mouth and eat and bury them if necessary. So primates like chimps and orangutans have also they've hit the jackpot for handling, because they have opposable thumbs like we do, which is extremely useful for grasping. So that's an extra feature that is a compromise on what your forearm might be able to do, but there's a big gain if you want to be very dexterous with your hands. So as humans, we fully embrace the benefits of being able to manipulate things with this type of dexterity, even if that means we can't outrun most creatures at short distances. However, it's said that humans are the fastest for endurance running, but that doesn't include me and maybe a few others of us. Now, besides manipulation and motion, we've also got communication. And different creatures voice in some way or other. for instance, and I've shown here, birds have this specialized equipment that other creatures don't have. Instead of a larynx like us, which is at the top of the pipe going down to our lungs, the trachea, they have a syrinx, which is right where the trachea branches. And this allows the bird can control both branches of the pipe going into the lungs separately and produce kind of stereo vibrations, which is, very clever. And if we're talking about communication and birds, we've got to kind of point out that no owl has ever said "to wit, to woo." If you've heard "to wit, to woo" in the woods, it was because it was two owls. One of them goes "to wit" and another goes "to woo." I don't know how they decide that amongst themselves, but that's apparently the fact. Now, probably there's no greater diversity than in this category of action senses than the issue of reproduction. The methods that different creatures use are really diverse. Some of them don't seem to be particularly pleasurable. In fact, some of them seem to be really dangerous. And we needn't go into all of them, but they really are diverse for something that all creatures intend to engage in. On the other hand, defecation is perhaps got the least variation in how it's done. It's something that all creatures do. Now, there's a difference. Carnivores produce sinkers and vegetarians produce floaters. But there's a formula that connects all of them, carnivores and vegetarians. And it goes like this: the greater the amount you need to poop, say as an elephant, the greater the speed at which it comes out. And this is true for all mammals. Quantity and exit speed are proportional. Hence, the time to pass feces is roughly the same for all mammals. And most of them fit in within this range of 5 to 19 seconds, but kind of peaking in terms of popularity at around 12 seconds. Humans, on the other hand, well, they just sit there. So these are our 5 senses of perception and 5 of action. They're shared amongst all creatures. The organs and their abilities and the ways that creatures use them varies considerably, but the underlying aspirations of these senses are common throughout the embodied world. These common aspirations seek to fulfill the common objective of consciousness present within all life forms, i.e. to experience and to express our will to live and enhance those experiences. But there's a further sense, one more, an internal sense that is vital to this whole process, and that is the mind. Because as well as wishing to eat, sleep, mate and defend, all organisms indulge their mind to greater or lesser extent. We've given examples of various creatures amusing themselves. We had the crow sliding down the roof on its snowboard. And we've seen them being curious, and they'll watch some things going on for a bit. They like to be entertained. Perhaps they muse on them. And this is a photograph of some cows outside my living room window, just staring in. And apparently what they're saying to each other is, my God, there's a poor little creature in there, locked up in that cage, and he's got no food anywhere in sight. So they muse for a little bit, they indulge their curiosity, then they go back to eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. And we humans aren't really that different. Yeah, we spend a little amount of mental energy thinking about some deep stuff. And the rest of the time, we just want to be entertained in some way. Of course, humans do explore science, and we've got technology and the humanities. And what do we do with all our advancement in those fields? We use them to further our eating, our sleeping, our mating, and defending, and keeping us entertained in between those activities. So we're not doing that much different. Maybe the balance of our time spent on them is different, but we're not really doing that much different to our poor cows in the field here. Now, the mind is at the center of the operation of all our senses. And just as the mind is non-neural and non-physical, as we have been describing, there is a subtle form of each of the other senses that exists and is linked to the mind. And it's linked to the mind as the underlying objectives or purposes for each of the 10 senses. So we have a picture like this. that there are the mind surrounded by the 10 senses, and those senses represent the intentional purpose of that faculty, of that ability, the aspiration to be able to see, to hear, to touch, to taste, and so on, and the aspiration to move, to manipulate, to communicate, and so on. This is the common factor of all creatures. What makes each creature different from one another is how that sense operates and what it is specifically formed and meant to achieve. So is your sense of seeing, for instance, intended to cover the visible spectrum that humans enjoy, or the ultraviolet vision of birds? Is your hearing intended to cover just the high frequencies of a bat, or perhaps the extreme low frequencies that a whale can hear? And what are your senses of action for? Like motion, what are they meant to achieve? Are we trying to run? Are we trying to fly, to swim, to crawl? Those aspirations, those subtle aspirations which are present within the non-neural kind of setup attached to the mind, these are the things that will define the information that specifies the actual physical organs that an organism will gain once it's developed. So this picture we have is of the 10 subtle sense objectives, sense objectives, gathered around the central internal sense of the mind. And so together, the specifics of what each of these senses, including the mind, is intended to achieve for an organism constitutes the underlying overall objective of that organism. It defines what that organism is and will appear as in terms of its kind of species type. Now, we've several times explained that we're really only able to analyze the things of this world according to their functions and their properties. So this analysis of what makes up the objective of an organism, kind of in terms of its properties and its functions, these help to understand and to define what a body is in terms of a body's functions and its features. Now, the standard textbook definition for a body is simply this. It is the physical structure of an organism, whether living or dead. Now, that's a very generalized statement, and I'm sure it applies. But I think it fails to tell us anything useful about the purpose of the body for an organism, or why it might be the salient features and attributes of a body. So I'm going to suggest something which I hope helps, and that is that a body is a biological structure accommodating the experience and expression of consciousness through the faculties of a specific set of perception and action senses. That is our definition of a physical body. A biological structure accommodating the experience and expression of consciousness through the faculties of a specific set of perception and action senses. Now, an organism refers to any individual plant, animal, or even a single cell life form. And although it might seem odd to talk of plants or single cell life forms as having senses, actually, I believe our definition is reasonable for all life forms, especially all the ones that we encounter in the world of biology on planet Earth. There may be other types of bodies in other worlds, and there may even be some sharing the planet with us that we aren't even aware of. As Star Trek Captain James T. Kirk would often be told, it's life, Jim, but not as we know it. But we're working with those creatures that we do know of. And I think this is a good working definition for our purposes at this stage. It clearly establishes the agenda or the objective for any template that is expected to form the physical body. And it is this objective that provides the organism with its morphological template. And we're defining the morphological template as an underlying state of information. It is basically information in this subtle form, in the same way as we defined information within the mind. So the morphological template is a state of information that specifies the shape, the function, and the properties of each of the perception and working organs that an organism needs to have. And I suggest it's useful to think of this in terms of kind of a form or a shape that we can conceive of. So we may imagine that each of these sensory objectives being located within this kind of generalized amorphous figure 8 shape that I've shown here. And this kind of template, this kind of arrangement, I think you can start to say, well, this applies to many creatures. You know, the layout could be used for many of the animals that we've talked about. You know, it may look a little humanish, but it also, with a little tweaking, it could be adjusted to pretty well any of the creatures that fit within our chordata phyla, i.e. mammals, birds, fish, reptiles and amphibians. And maybe with a little further tweaking, you could see that it would probably suit any other of the major groupings of animals, even little E. coli bacteria. Now, we suggest that this type of morphological template represents what is behind the principle of homology. We talked about homology as being the key justification that many biologists use in order to justify the idea of common descent. And really, we have, since if you're going to use homology, particularly of structures and organs, as the basis, but you haven't got an idea of how that is formed within a body, then it doesn't really make sense to link it to any other type of explanation. If you're going to use homology, you need to be able to explain where it comes from within the organism. And then we can see how that might be, that source of form exists within all species. And that's what we're suggesting here. We have a morphological form that can be common and at the same time produce distinctiveness within the different creatures. So now you may think, well, maybe, okay, there's a reasonable case for this, but it still sounds a little far-fetched, perhaps. I think we just have to go back and just remind ourselves that currently within biology, there's nothing that accounts for the actual form a body will take. And this is particularly clear when we kind of look at the very precise sequence that the processes that are happening within the development of the embryo. Now, I hope you don't get dizzy looking at this, but basically this is the conveyor belt for how to build a human body. Starting from the first egg being appearing and fertilized into 2, 4, 8. That's the zygote stage that we talked about. And we looked at the blue section previously, which indicates cell differentiation. Now we're going to have a look at the transition into the yellow bit. So we're looking what's happening within week 4 and then from week 5. And so at the end of week 3, there is the batch of cells that grew from the original fertilized egg cell has fully implanted itself on the wall of the womb. And that's the bottom bit. So at this point, the cells are a little bit differentiated into 2 distinct areas. We've got the epiblast area, which is the green bit, which is facing the cavity of the womb, and the hypoblast area, which is lying against the wall of the womb. Now, the cells in both the epiblast and the hypoblast have already kind of specialized to a degree, but there's much more to do. At this moment, the blastocyst, which is that group, is called bilaminar, meaning it's got 2 layers, the epiblast and the hypoblast. Now it goes through a process of gastrulation, and in which the 2 layers become 3. Now, to see this, we're going to focus on some of the action within the upper layer of the epiblast. And at this stage, the blastocyst, the whole kind of body, the whole thing is flattened like a disc. So it looks like this. And it's got the green and the blue areas that we saw previously. However, as more cells divide and multiply within the green area, they specialize to the next degree, and they start to push away the hypoblast cells of the blue area, and they're forming a new area of different type cells, which are shown in yellow. So these yellow ones are different to the green ones, and they're pushing away the blue type. So this area continues to grow and expand, and this produces the third layer. And so now we have the trilaminar stage of the embryonic disc. 3 areas now defined. The ectoderm, which is the green bit on the top, the mesoderm, the middle bit of yellow, and the endoderm, which is the bottom bit connected or closer to the womb wall. So each of these areas will take up entirely different functions for the embryo. That itself is a question. But so is the movement of the new specialized cells to their respective specific locations within each of these areas. For instance, the specialized cells within the yellow zone, the mesoderm, start to move to their required locations where they need to be in order to produce the organs in the place within the embryo that they need to be for the body to form. Now, for instance, we can look at some of the other examples here. The cells that migrated to the top middle bit of the mesoderm form what's called the notochord. And here it's shown as this small dot of pink in the diagram, and I've labeled it 1. And here they form a sort of flexible rod structure that defines the linear shape of the body. Now, where is that form being specified from? Where's that coming from? Then various specialized cells in the middle upper part of the mesoderm, and they're labeled 2, either side of 1. They align themselves along that pink line going back, the notochord, and they start to form the specific shape of our skeleton with all the cartilage and all the muscles connected in the right places. Other specialized cells of the mesoderm in area 3 migrate to their specific location because they're going to form the kidneys and the urogenital organs. And the cells in the outer areas, 4 on either side, become the cardiovascular system of the heart and blood vessels. So we ask, where all this information within the DNA or these cells can be said to direct this process so precisely. And then the areas of the endoderm, the blue areas, they then form all the other organs, the cardiovascular, and I'm kind of missing the slide on this, I think. They form all the other different organs, including our lungs, our pancreas, the stomach, and so on. So there's a lot of questions in all of this. These questions are kind of cell differentiation, which we've talked about, and why it happens in different stages. Why these differentiated cells migrate to specific locations. Remember that the rationale for why they specialize in the way they do was according to their locations. However, now once they're kind of specialized in that location, they decide to go wandering off to another location. So what determines that? And why are they able to go where the organ needs to be developed? And the further specialization that's going to have to take place there for the different forms of tissues that each of those organs needs in order to create their respective forms. There's no information for this anywhere. And now it's said that this process is determined by intercellular signaling. Yeah, and there's no doubt that cells do exchange information. But what coordinates the signals and the informations that they contain? What determines how these cells connect one to another and tell each other what to do? You know, on what basis are they coordinating each other's activities and telling this cell, you be this and I'll be this and you'll be over there? Signaling is happening, but where's the coordination for that? So I'd suggest that the idea of intercellular signaling doesn't answer the question of coordination. Actually, it raises the need for explaining coordination. So it'd be fair to say that something much more is needed. And we need it to explain the development of the form of the embryo. Now here we have the stage at the end of week 5. What you see here is only 2 to 4 millimeters long, so tiny still. But already the shape of the embryo, as I have ringed it in red, including some green, the yellow, and some of the blue, is already taking shape. And at this point, really, it's been a blob of just different forms of tissue. But now the various organs start to form. There are buds where the arms and legs are starting to poke out. There are dark spots on the side of the face for the eyes and for the ears. Something is pressing on the embryo, imposing specific form on this blob of tissue. And the same is at work with the internal organs. One of the first to form is the heart, which starts to beat by week 8. It's already got 4 chambers and pumping blood around this little body. And then by this time, most of the other internal organs have also started to form. But nowhere in the biology of the DNA or the cells is the form of these organs or the overall form of the body specified. So, although the proposition of the subtle body as a morphological template seems maybe a little outlandish, there are no other contenders that we know of. Nor does our proposition contravene existing biology. As we explained, all the biology that we have at the moment, all it does is offer a description of what happens and when it happens. But it doesn't give us any explanation why it happens and what is coordinating, what is providing the template. So it doesn't explain what provides the information specifying the overall form. It doesn't explain the information about the form of the individual organs, and it doesn't explain the specific sequence that the whole process of embryogenesis and organogenesis, both from the cell differentiation to the formation of each of these organs. How does that happen in that precise way every time, practically? Now, having kind of seen that there is a need and a rationale for looking and considering our morphological template, let's get back to it. So we're back to our subtle form of the body that provides the physical form, the physical body with its overall shape and function and features and faculties. So the one that we're using here is the standard version that we talked about earlier for animals, birds, fish, reptiles, and so on. Now, for this section, I'm going to draw on certain concepts from within the Sankhya philosophy, which is one part of the larger kind of Vedic wisdom tradition. And we're going to present some of the metaphysics that underlies the morphology of living beings. So this is our psychophysical model, and we want to focus on the mind bit. Now, we've used this rather vague term mind quite a bit in recent sessions, and that's fine. Sometimes we just need to be keep things simple. But we've talked about before that it includes the 3 cognitive functions. So now we're having to go back to consider these 3 sub functions, which are the persona, our sense of selfhood and identity, the gatekeeper of intelligence, and the pool of the mind. And we discussed in earlier sessions how will expressed by consciousness is translated into intention by the interacting feedback of the mind, which generates ideas, and intelligence, which sets the preference for and then reviews, filters, and allows the mental content from the mind to be what we experience. So together the intelligence and the mind produce what we have been calling intention. Desires, ideas, action, plans, strategies, and things like that. And we've shown how the information contained within mental intention can affect the behavior and properties of physical and biological matter. However, we're going to go, there's a deeper level here. And at a deeper level, there is the identity of the persona. And it is here that the underlying concept for the body is held. So the principal factor for conceiving who we are is in relationship to the physical body that we have. Currently we, and I think this includes all the viewers of this presentation, conceive of our body as that of a human organism. We see it in the mirror. It's got the head, arms and legs in the right places, and the face is the usual components: eyes, ears, nose, mouth, roughly the right position. So no doubt my conception of myself is that I am a human organism, or at least I am the conscious entity believing that the organism that accommodates me is that of a human type. And by that I mean a human type, it's a particular specification of the 10 senses gathered around the mind that typifies human faculties, that specifies and typifies and provides and generates the human faculties that I enjoy within this body. So this identity has its own form, and it represents the inherent specifying information of our organism type. Now, it's important to note that this persona concept of our organism type is not something we develop during our life. I don't just keep looking in the mirror and think, oh my God, I'm a human, I must, and that it develops like that. No, the organism type, this is present with us from the moment we start to associate with this body. And that goes way back to that little egg being fertilized. Now, how that works is going to be discussed in a little more detail next week. But it relates to the examples we gave of mental content being carried over in what were called cases of the reincarnation type. So what we are suggesting is that the concept of the organism which will specify our body is present at the beginning point of conception, and it then flows after that. Now, where does that come from? How does it get there? That is something we're going to look at more next week. So our persona concept defines the nature of our intelligence and our mind. So we can think it's now starting to expand. All these cognitive functions are kind of working together within this overall organism type concept. So in this way, there is the subtle body contains these elements: persona, intelligence, and the pool of the mind. But the subtle body actually continues to expand and to include other things. What it does is it includes then the specific types of the 10 senses that are the characteristics of our organization type. So it gathers to itself the 10 senses. But the senses not as organs at this stage, but as senses existing in a kind of subtle potential state, a state that represents the information that specifies the specific form, the functions and properties that will make up the exact organs that we will enjoy as part of the faculties of this particular body, this organism we call human. So this subtle form that we have been calling the Sukshma Sharira doesn't just include the cognitive elements, but also the subtle forms of the 10 senses. The aspirations to see, to hear, to taste, and so on. The aspirations to move, to manipulate, to communicate, to reproduce, etc. And to be complete in terms of the description from Sankhya philosophy, it said that this subtle form also contains another set of functions. And these are the 5 types of pranas, generally translated as the life airs. And these pranas facilitate and regulate the circulation of the sub-biological energy throughout the body. They connect the functioning of the physical sensory organs with the cognitive faculties. So many believe that it is the passage of the pranas within the body that facilitates the actual coordination of subtle form and information throughout all the organs and the cells. So here we have the subtle body concept of our organism type. So it includes the 10 senses, it includes the pranas, and basically we have the subtle body as a package of the following sub-biological features: the 3 cognitive elements, persona, intelligence, and the pool of the mind, the set of 10 subtle senses, and the 5 prana life airs. Altogether, these compose the Sukshma Sharira. And essentially, this is a package of specifying information contained within these subtle elements, all related to and dependent on the cognitive functions. And this subtle body package of information underpins and defines the bodies of all life forms. It is the common feature of all life. So just to kind of draw ourselves to a conclusion for today, just like to bring these points together. We've identified that the prime objective of a physical body for all life forms is to accommodate consciousness, particularly the aspirations of consciousness to experience events and activities and to express its will to enhance those experiences. And by considering the activities that are common amongst animals and the senses that they use to engage in those activities, we've concluded that a body can be defined in terms of its sensory aspirations. Specifically, we said a body is a biological structure accommodating the experience and expression of consciousness through the faculties of a specific set of perception and action senses. And these aspirations and purposes for sense engagement are present in subtle form within the cognitive functions, but at a deeper level, that they're at a much deeper level than our ordinary kind of everyday conscious intentions. These are right at the base level of our cognitive kind of psyche. And we hold this persona identity of our organism type very deep within us. It's the prime image we have of who we are and what we believe we are. So that is the nature of the subtle body. Our concept of it is what not only defines our body, but it's what we have come to believe we are in actuality. However, the subtle body is itself a state of sub-biological information. Sub-biological in that it is not in the form of physics or biology. It is kind of information in this subtle state. But it is information that has the ability, the capacity to specify the body in terms of its form, its features, and its faculties. And this concept of the subtle body addresses the issue that we've identified within biology. What is the overall form and coordination going on within our bodies? And I'd say this is particularly useful in the absence of any other proposition to explain how this works within biology. But we have many more questions that we'll need to address. How does the subtle body have specifying information from the earliest moment in this lifetime? Why am I in a human body rather than another type? And how does all of this help us with the questions of the different species of life and how they make their appearance on this planet? So, questions to be addressed. I invite you all to join us again next week, when we'll be looking at the appearance and diversification of the species. It's the same time, live on Thursday, 15th of October. And if you have questions, I invite you to send them in to info@s-pi.org. See you next week. Hare Krishna.